Okay. So as I mentioned, right, tonight's exercise is you getting this behind the scenes view of what it's like to be part of the admissions committee, what it's like to kind of grapple with the different application components. Before I dive into more of the nitty gritty, I have a few just overall tips that I want to give you all. This has to do with really kind of how to set yourselves up for success and how to have a strategy in the application cycle. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today are going to go back and forth between those two main goals. So the first in being successful is to stay organized. So you have to get organized first, obviously. I encourage you all to create a spreadsheet or some other form of easy to manage and easy to kind of manipulate tool. I find a spreadsheet to be the easiest for myself. On this spreadsheet, you are going to kind of be like your master document. This is where you're going to go to keep track of all of the different things about the schools, all of the different things about their programs, their deadlines, their application components, etc. You should also keep a separate tab on your spreadsheet that's going to have all the information about yourself that you either know is required to provide on the application, right? Because you've looked at the applications or you just have a good sense, and also the things that you just know you want to add into your application, right? So that may come in the form of some optional things, and we'll talk about those in greater detail in a little while. But that's the strategy part, right? So the first is the spreadsheet to get organized and to stay organized and kind of wrap your head around all of the different things. The way I envision it, if you're not a spreadsheet person, is I think of school names in the rows, and I think the columns are the things that you're keeping track of, right? So for example, the application deadline for Southwestern is currently set at April 1st. Like, so I would have an application deadline column. I would have another column that asks, does the school have a priority deadline? Does the school have early decision? Does the school release decisions all at one time? Does the school do rolling admissions, et cetera, et cetera? So in my vision, these are columns, and this can help you keep track. Okay. And then the strategy part is that second tab. And that's to allow you to keep track of all of the things about yourself that you either must or want to include somewhere in the application process. And it's also part of your organization, of course, too. But this will ensure that you don't leave something off the table. That could be a required component that somehow you've missed, and there might be a penalty for that somewhere down the road. This also means you're not forgetting some of your wonderful accomplishments and different things that you wanted to make sure that whomever was reading your file had the benefit of knowing. Okay, so those are our first two main tips. So your spreadsheet to get organized about the schools and your spreadsheet that's going to help you be organized about yourself. Okay, so here are going to be the things. Components of a law school application. So I'm going to try and go back and forth between kind of general advice and information as well as more Southwestern specific information. So all law schools participate with LSAC, that's the Law School Admissions Council, and have an opportunity to collect information about you. This is also where our applications live, is with LSAC. Not every school requires an LSAT, the law school admissions test, but the majority of schools do. Some schools who no longer require the LSAT might have another test that they require, something like a GRE or a GMAT. This is where you're going to have to go to every school's application instruction, and again, keep track in your spreadsheet. If you do have a school that you're applying to where you're required to take the LSAT, such as Southwestern, we do require it. Or if you're at a school who would take perhaps either, then here's some information for you about the LSAT, right? It's $248 per exam. There's something called score preview, which is the opportunity to see a score before it's officially released. So if you know you want to see it, you can pay $45 before you take the test. If you're not sure and you want to gauge until you're on the other side of the test before you decide to use this option, that's going to cost you more money after the fact. That's going to be $85. So you're also going to have to sign up just in general for something called Credential Assembly Service. This is the service that you send all of your undergraduate transcripts through. And LSAC takes all of the information and gives a cumulative GPA to the law schools, and more on that in a little bit. You'll see here, we also require those transcripts, all undergraduate transcripts. There's a writing sample. This is your LSAT writing sample. You must have one at least on record in order to have your LSAT score released. If you take the test multiple times, unless it's a school-specific requirement, you only need to have one LSAT writing sample. Excuse me. Or LSAC will not release the scores. Letters of recommendation are going to vary from school to school in terms of what kinds of letters, meaning who writes them. Academic versus professional typically are the two main categories. Some schools have letters that are required. Some schools have optional letters only. There's a minimum, there's a maximum. Again, really specific to each school. Then we have the actual application itself. Some schools have an application fee, such as Southwestern, but we are very generous about our fee waivers. So if you just email us and ask us for an application fee waiver, we will grant that for you. That waives the $60 fee. Other schools may not have an application fee. There's also the personal statement. Again, each school is going to have their specific prompt or instructions. One size does not fit all. There are optional statements, which, as they are named, are optional. You're going to have the resume. Some schools that may be required, some schools it's optional. I have put everything here highlighted in this turquoise that is required at Southwestern. And then you're going to have various addenda. There's optional versus required types of addenda. So something like an LSAT or GPA addendum where you're giving some more context to your score or to your grades, those are typically optional, but can be recommended in certain situations. A character and fitness addendum, though, however, is something that is required if you answer yes to any of our character and fitness questions at the end of the application. Things like, have you ever been party to a lawsuit? Have you ever been on academic probation? Have you ever been convicted of a crime, etc.? These questions will also vary from school to school. They may look a little bit like the questions that the bar exam, the committee, the council that runs the bar exam for each state may also have, but they're not, at least for us, they're not intended to be exactly the same. Okay, so again, here's some more information about the LSAT. Excuse me. Some of these have already passed. So the August and the September dates have passed, but these are the annual test dates. And then, as you can see, there's some upcoming ones. Southwestern will accept through the April exam for all of the programs, including our SCALE program, which is our 2-year accelerated program. And we will accept through the June test for all of the programs except for the SCALE program. So sorry, I probably said that in a little bit more confusing way, but if you are somebody who's thinking about applying to our 2-year program, the last LSAT we can consider is the April test. If you're considering any of our other programs, then June is the last test, but I don't recommend that you wait to take one of those really late exams because that is at the tail end of our application cycle. Okay, so now we're going to get into some more of the nitty-gritty. So there's a banner sheet. I referenced it on the component slide. On the beginning of every CAS report, again, that's the Credential Assembly Service Report, there is one document, the first sheet is one synopsis of a lot of different things. So for the sake of just how this comes across on a slide, I divided it up into thirds. So here we're looking at the top third. You can see here that, it would have your name, your LSAC account number. It will tell us your undergraduate major, your gender, your sex. Now, ethnicity, this happens to be an older screenshot, so it does say ethnicity, but in reality, we actually don't see that anymore. It's suppressed. You can see that it says the institutions attended, so where you went to school. This would be all of your undergraduate colleges, universities, community colleges, etc. And then there's the notes from transcripts. So there's academic honors. It could also say academic dismissal, academic probation. It could say financial obligation, whatever those literal notes are from the transcripts, this is where it would show up. This is particularly relevant because, as I mentioned in the slide previously, when we ask you the questions about character and fitness, we are looking for things to match. So if we ask you the question, which we do, about if you've ever been on academic probation, and if you answer no, but then we come to this banner sheet and it says that you in fact were, that's problematic. So some schools might just decide to send you to something at LSAC called the Misconduct and Irregularities Committee. And that committee can decide that even though you may not have intended, right? Intent is not part of the equation, but you did not answer the question truthfully. And if there is a finding for misconduct or irregularity, that will be a permanent flag on your record that will go to every law school you have ever applied to, and it will ever go to every law school that you might apply to in the future in perpetuity. So it's really important that you try to answer consistently, as well as when you get to, after law school, and I was talking about the bar exam, you complete something called the moral character application, and it's a really extensive background check. And one of the things that happens with the bar examiners is that they match up your answers to your bar, to that moral character application. They match up your answers to your law school application. They actually get your law school application from each of the schools. And they are also looking to see that you are consistent with your reporting. So just right off the bat, my advice here is get a copy of all of your undergraduate transcripts. So the definition of an undergraduate transcript for these purposes is anything that you took at any kind of community college or four-year university until the time in which your four-year degree was conferred. So if you were somebody who took, one or two community college classes while you were in high school, that's technically an undergraduate level. Okay, so everything, get a copy of it, just like you should get a copy of your credit report so that you can make sure that everything on your credit report is accurate. You should get a copy of your transcripts so that you know what's on the transcripts too. It will help you in the long run, especially as I've heard in so many cases, and I'm sure Nancy could agree, there are so many students every year who tell us there's something wrong on their transcript, and they are like working against the clock at that point to try to get it corrected. So do yourselves that little bit of service and get a copy of those transcripts. They can be unofficial for your purposes, but the official ones do need to go to LSAC. That's who you send all of your undergraduate transcripts to. So in this next slide, it's gonna be a lot of numbers. I highlighted kind of the most important parts. It's all really important, but just to kind of give you kind of like some sense. And the part there that's in the blue box, some of that won't make sense until you see the next slide, which is going to have the LSAT scores. What we can see here, though, in the orange box going across kind of the middle of the section is we see the years, right, under the transcript analysis. We see 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, et cetera. And then if you look at the row where the purple arrow is, that tells me when this person, which was, I think is Cal State Northridge, when they attended Cal State Northridge in 13, 14, they had 25 units. If you look at the green arrow row, those 25 units, they earned a 283, okay? And their CUME, there's not an arrow there, but it's the very next row. It says CUME GPA / college, because that's their first year, it's still a 2.83. As you move over, though, to the next column, you can see they took a few more units. So they went from 25 units that year to 29 in 14-15. Their GPA goes down to 5.5, which brings their CUME down to a 2.68, okay? And so on and so forth. So we go all the way over, and I can see here that at some point they do pick it back up, right? In 15-16, they get a 3.3. It goes back down again in 16-17. They get a 2.62. Comes back up again in 17, that very last, it's probably just like one term, but it's only 7 units. So even though they got a 3.43, it didn't help their CUME GPA a ton. And it leaves them with an end CUME GPA of a 2.86. Everybody following so far? Okay. So the ways we use this is that it helps us if it's a school that we're not that familiar with. We can kind of see like, how did the person do? You can see there's also a row in the far right column, there's a 29%, and it's CUME GPA, excuse me, percentile rank. That tells us the student's class rank. In the degree school row, which is at the top, you'll see there's a bunch of little tiny numbers, but we got like a 95 and up, 90 to 94. And if you slide all the way to the right, 0 to 19, this is supposed to tell us, right, that, and in this example, I just highlighted the 5% of of students from this university over 3 years, this is a 3-year period, were in the top 36, and I get to 36 by just doing the math there, that 45 to 49, where that falls is 36, test takers from that school. So it kind of gives you some sense of how high performing students are from this school on just the LSAT. Okay. The next slide, we're going to look at the LSAT scores. So I use this one, despite it being old, because it does have an array of different scores. So I want you to kind of get a sense of what we see. Many of you had said you already had taken the LSAT. Now, I don't know if any of you took it before or during COVID, but there is a little bit of a difference in how LSAC presents that information. So if somebody took a test between May of 2020 through June of 2021, they call that the LSAT Flex, and they are technically broken out from the rest of the LSAT scores. Nothing you need to worry about if this is, part of your background, but just so you have a little bit of sense how we see it. It was a little bit different. You can see here we get an actual score. So that's in the score column. We also, to the very left of that, have a score band. So each set of scores really is part of a band. You can also see in the very first row, there's a C, that's for a cancellation. And if you look a little bit towards the bottom right, you can see there's a whole key there. A for absent, C for cancel, I for statistical cancel, N for LSAC cancel, etc. So we do get, some kind of flag for every test administration that you register for. If you cancel the test before you take it, like let's say you just postpone it, we won't see anything here. But if you register for the test and you just don't do the test, that's an absent. So that does get recorded. So people ask a lot about, well, what does it mean if I cancel the score? Or what does it mean if I use score preview? Or what does it mean if I take the test, more than once? And I think you could ask a lot of admissions officers and you might get a wide variety of opinion. I can really only give you mine in terms of at least my philosophy about multiple test taking. But I think, just overall, I can give you some general feedback about it. One time that you do something does not a pattern make, but multiple times that you do something does catch our eye. So if you are taking the test 2, 3, 4 times and you're canceling repeatedly, that's going to catch our attention, and probably not in a great way. Even if you're not canceling, but you're just taking the test over and over and over again, particularly if there's not a lot of improvement, probably also going to catch our attention. So I am not of the philosophy that says just take the test as many times as you can and hope for the best. I think, and there's a good chunk of you who haven't yet taken it, and some who don't even have a plan yet for when you might. I'm of the philosophy, if you can, you should plan for one time. Now, that's not always going to be the right answer for you. Some of you will definitely benefit from taking the test a second time, maybe even a third time. But, what I think you should do, if that's your situation, is you should do something differently, right? There's a reason you want to take the test again. And presumably that means you think you can do better. So whether or not that means you're going to study longer, you're going to study differently, maybe you're going to sign up for a commercial course like a Blueprint, a Test Masters, a Kaplan, whatever it may be. That's the kind of information that could also be helpful in an LSAT addendum. So if your score is plus or minus 5 points, then generally speaking, schools are looking for an LSAT addendum. And it doesn't have to be, long and drawn out, but just some additional context can be helpful. There is a maximum number of times you can take the test each year, and there's also a lifetime test limit. So, I don't think anybody should be pushing those limits. Typically speaking, again, I think you should aim for once, twice, and if you have a really good reason, maybe a third time. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the GPA calculations, because I want to make sure everybody understands this. And if you have questions about this in your particular situation, please hold those questions for the Q&A period. But it is kind of borderline confusing and straightforward all at the same time. So I mentioned that you have to have all of your undergraduate transcripts submitted to LSAC. The reason is that they're going to calculate a cumulative GPA. We saw it in the last slide. In this particular case, this person only went to one school. So their degree granting GPA is the same as their cumulative GPA. It's a 286. And it just so happens in this example, the degree and the cum is the same as well, but it is often not. And the difference is the degree GPA is the last GPA that you received at the cumulative level from the university where you obtained your 4-year degree. When you transfer schools or when you just apply some transfer credit even, that school, let's pick on UCLA, they're our biggest feeder school. If you went to Pierce College, one of the local community colleges, and you did a couple years worth of units at Pierce, and you transferred to UCLA, UCLA would give you credit for those courses. And they would say, great, you took 50 units, great, you don't have to take these 50 units here at UCLA. But when you transfer in, you're going to start at a 0 GPA at UCLA. And you're going to go about your time there. You're going to finish your remaining, 2 years or so. And when you ultimately graduate, the GPA you have from UCLA is your degree granting GPA. But your cumulative GPA for these purposes also will include those first 2 years from Pierce. So LSAC will take all of the grades you've earned and calculate a new GPA for you. And that is the GPAs that all law schools use. That's what we're going to use for admissions. That's what we're going to use for scholarship. So if you are not sure what the GPA looks like, you can go into your LSAC profile and see for yourself what was calculated for you. This is, again, why it's important that you know what's on your transcripts, because so many times people think their GPA is higher than it is. And it puts you kind of in an awkward position when you're contacting an admissions office and you say, like, I don't understand how I'm on the waiting list, or I don't understand, what's happening with my file. I have a such and such LSAT and GPA score. And then we look and we're like, that's not the GPA that you have. And it just can kind of undercut your position when you're talking to schools and trying to figure out, all the next steps. So do yourselves that favor. There is a link. Nancy, I don't know if you've already dropped it. I can't see the chat, but there is an LSAC link if you want to go on their site and learn more about the GPA calculation. Okay, so let's talk now about holistic review. So that's a term that most, if not all, schools will use. This means that we are taking a comprehensive look at your file. We're looking at your numerical factors, your LSAT, your undergraduate GPA. And again, if a school is not requiring the LSAT, maybe that's a GRE score or a GMAT, something of that nature. Then you have your non-numerical factors, all the different written statements, your resume, any other information that you're providing, and of course, your letters of recommendation. So we're going to start first with letters of recommendation. And I start here because, number one, I didn't say this, but part of my methodology when I review a file is I start first at the CAS report. So I look first at that banner sheet that we went over, and I get that summary right off the bat. I can see scores, school, major, GPA trends, right? Do they go up? Do they go down? Etc. I start there. And then I flip to kind of the last pages in the document. These are all electronic, by the way. And then I read the letters of recommendation. And then I go back in the middle and I'll read the transcripts and the writing sample. Excuse me. But I like to read the letters of recommendation kind of first in my holistic review because it's the only other place in the application where I'm getting a third party's assessment. I find that to be very helpful. As I'm reading a person's file, with that banner sheet, I'm making all sorts of predictions and assumptions. And then I kind of go searching for the either confirmations of those things in the materials, or I'm looking to have my mind changed, depending on what it may be. But the letters, right, if you've been strategic, and I'm using that word again, if you've been strategic, you've thought about who in your circle, who in the people of your life are going to be your best advocates. Now, this also means, of course, you're following whatever instructions the school may give you. If the school says you must have an academic letter, then you are going to have an academic letter. There are rarely excuse me, if ever, any exemptions from that. So exemptions from the instructions, that is. Southwestern doesn't have a particular rule about who writes your letters, be it academic or professional, but some schools do. Now, we require at least one letter, and the maximum is 3. It doesn't mean that because the maximum is 3, that you need 3, right? So having 1 or maybe 2 really strong, powerful letters is much better than having, an additional 1 or 2 that's kind of mediocre in there. So really think again about the people that are in your circle, and they can be a little bit outside the circle. Maybe you just have, like a really formal relationship with somebody, but so long as they know you well, they can really add a lot of perspective to the application. And I'll have some do's and don'ts for you on the presentation as well. But the next thing I'm going to show you is going to be an excerpt. So this is where you're going to have an opportunity to kind of give some feedback about what you think about this kind of language, this kind of information. You can see there's in the far corners, there's just a little snapshots about the candidate. They're 35 years old. At the time of applying, they had a 156 and a 324. They were local to the law school. They attended a state university. Their major was political science. Their undergraduate year was 2025. In their personal statement, they talked about being young and a first generation in their community. They talked about their core values, being a hard worker, but they were kind of just stuck, and they really have to push themselves to succeed. And then you've got the little excerpts there in the middle. So I'm going to let you read that for a second. Okay, so would anybody like to volunteer and give their impression about these excerpts? Do you find them to be helpful? Do you find them to be too vague, too specific? Does this sound like somebody who might know the candidate particularly well or not well enough? What are your thoughts? Okay, help me with the name. Is it Samuk?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just general thoughts on this.
Uh-huh.
I think the third excerpt really shows that like how they stand out from a crowd and in a research university. So that's a good sign for an applicant. Like they stand out, they push themselves for academic rigor, and they have a seriousness in their purpose, which is a really good quote to use when in a letter of recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other thoughts? Does anybody wish there was more? Anybody feel like it's lacking? Callie.
Yeah, I was looking for something like a specific case to be made, but it seems like just high level compliments, which, yeah, that's kind of where I was missing
Okay.
something. Yeah.
So some more pointed examples, perhaps.
Yeah, specific cases. Yeah.
Okay. Adrian.
Uh, can y'all hear me? I think.
Yes.
Okay. My feedback is kind of similar to what Callie had said. I'd say I'd like maybe more specific examples in the realm of where it says that. Are we just talking about this third section or the whole thing?
Well, you can talk about anything that you see on the screen.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because he mentions that the applicant has the ability to, let me find it, examine himself. And basically, he says when he's challenged, he finds ways to rise above those challenges. And I would have liked to see maybe like a little color, like an example there, kind of like, okay, well, when he's faced with challenges, he shows resilience and adaptivity, but like how, in what ways?
Okay. Thank you, Carmen.
Hi. I guess I will piggyback off of what they said about it being kind of vague. The one thing that I find to be like more like I would like to see some more about that is that he himself said that he lacked the direction and felt like inferior academically, but I don't feel like I can see that or sense that from this statement. So like maybe he felt that way in another class, but here I'm not getting it. Like it seemed like he did really well and easily.
He rose to the challenge.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So Edwin, I'm going to toss you a question if that's okay. So what are some ways that this candidate could have helped the recommender with more specific information? So that seems to be a little bit of consensus from our commenters that some more specificity would have been better. How would one go about doing that? Edwin?
Yes, I believe if you added quantifiable achievements to this letter, stating concrete like numbers or evidence of what they accomplished, maybe an example or two, that might strengthen the letter.
Okay, but what does that look like on the part
Mm.
of the applicant? What does that translate to? Not even,
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me again.
no, it's okay. You can share.
Yeah, maybe an example of like an extraordinary achievement, maybe a specific assignment, a specific thesis, maybe something outside of the classroom that really stood out to the writer,
Okay,
some maybe a life experience.
thank you. Carmen, something to add?
I would ask them, especially if they were a teacher and they might not have known the characteristics that I know of myself, kind of ask that person, hey, here's kind of a synopsis of how I think I was in your class or who I am as a person. And not like telling them they have to write about that because it has to be in their own words, but to kind of give them like a guidepost and like a map. So, because I mean, they probably have like a lot of kids in their class. So to help them kind of like remind them that, oh yeah, he or she was, very honest. They had a hard time, but they worked really hard to kind of just help them write it for you.
Okay, great. Okay, let's move on to the next excerpt. Okay, this is going to be Jamie Jurist, 22, female, 163, 2.5. They went to school out of state at a private university, environmental science, graduated in 2020. In their personal statement, they talked about an internal conflict between religion and ethnicity, strong ties to family, which also led them to taking over financial challenges within the family. Okay, so what are some comments here? What are your impressions? Carmen?
I like that this teacher knew this like person on like a more personal kind of level to where that they understood the hardships that they encountered while in class and they still like rose, and it also like matches their statement, so it kind of solidifies that person to you.
Thank you. Sonia?
I think it's great that the applicant, had someone that's been to law school kind of write her letter rec for her, because obviously this person's been through law school and they know what it takes and they've been successful in passing the bar. So I think that was a great perspective to include that. And I realize that not everyone is going to have that going for them, but it would work really well for this specific applicant.
Okay, thank you. Corey?
Yeah, so two things stand out to me. The first, in regards to the letter of recommendation, is the example detailing the task balancing that the candidate had to do in terms of interning and working um, and going to undergraduate school. And the second thing that stands out is uh, relatively a, a, a good LSAT score with a fairly mediocre GPA, which I would expect to see some sort of story, whether explicitly explaining that or implicitly explaining that in terms of at somewhere else in the application.
Okay, let's tease that out a little bit more. So this kind of goes to what I was saying when I read the banner sheet and I start making some assumptions, or I start hoping that I'm going to come across some other context. Do you feel like you're kind of at the precipice of trying to follow some breadcrumbs, right? So you've seen this 2.5 GPA. Now, granted, also in environmental science, so it's a little bit more rigorous of a major, but I understand your point about the 2.5 not being, you know, as competitive perhaps. But I'm hearing, right, from this recommender, in their own words and their knowledge of this person's, as they describe it, backbreaking schedule, right? Now I'm starting to think, oh, maybe that's why the grades have suffered a little bit. Also, the fact that they chose to have a professional letter submitted instead of an academic letter might also go along with that, because maybe, right, if they weren't as entrenched in school because they were so busy doing all sorts of other things that were important, maybe that kind of hindered their opportunities to make, you know, academic relationships. So is that kind of what you were saying, is in a way too,
Yeah.
that you're expecting to kind of see more of this play out?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that could stand out there is maybe didn't have as much of a propensity for the environmental sciences, the major that she chose,
Very
as she
well could
does
be.
for law, which she found in the
Yep, very well could be. Thank you. Carissa.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Um, One thing that really stuck out about this excerpt to me, of which I do see that the person that wrote this letter of recommendation had the privilege to work with this student, and also to write about her. And it kind of reminded me of my situation. And as I'm listening to other individuals kind of um, critique this excerpt, I really had a question. I was wondering what would it be more so that, that the committee would be looking for? Because just like this student, I've worked two jobs in undergrad and I don't have the best GPA, but I've worked hard all of my years to make sure that I graduated and done all of these things. So I guess I'm just kind of wondering, like, or maybe someone else could kind of chime in and maybe give a little bit of an insight of what is it exactly, that they could have, because we don't write our own letters of recommendation, so we can't really, say what other people are going to say about us or what they're going to.
Absolutely. But you know, if we go back, I think it was more illustrative right here with Robert Tortoise, that there was many here that, you know, I'm not saying by any means that these are bad excerpts in terms of, you know, that they don't add value. I think there's actually a decent amount of value amongst these various statements, right? But I think there's a different kind of impression between the two. I think it seems like in the second one that perhaps, I think it was Carmen that said, you could kind of tell that the recommender knew the candidate a little bit more. Now, it also could just be that the candidate prepared that recommender better than this candidate here when we went back to Robert. And this is kind of what I was alluding to in my comments when I was asking, you know, Edwin at first, what could this candidate have done, right? And so when you want somebody else to play a role in this process, right? At the end of the day, this is for you. This is not for them. They don't get anything out of this. So you also have to make sure their job is as easy as it can be, and that you have kind of served up, if you will, on a proverbial silver platter, the information that will arm them with the things that they need to write a compelling, positive letter for you. So that means, you know, scheduling an appointment, sitting down with them, making sure that this conversation is not the first time they've ever heard you wanted to go to law school, right? You want to hopefully choose someone or ask someone who is already familiar with your work. And I'm using that term work very loosely. It could be academic, could be professional. But you want to have some kind of rapport because it helps them, I think, dial in a little bit more. I think in addition to that, you should give them at the very least a really good draft of your personal statement. You should give them a copy of your resume. You should ask them, and I can't remember who of our commenters was kind of, maybe it was Callie that started it, was talking about like more specificity. If there is something in your background that you want them to cover, hey, you were selected for a prestigious honors program. Hey, you were selected to lead a team at work on a big project, whatever it is, ask them in that kind of specificity to include it, right? This is you helping them help you. And that's what the whole thing is about. So hopefully that kind of crystallizes it for you all. And Carissa, there is no, magic answer of like, what are we looking for, right? Like there's good, there's great, there's wow, and there's a lot of lackluster and average and not great. So you can only do what you can do to kind of facilitate the process. But hopefully you get, some tips here on what you can do to kind of help yourself. So here are the tips for letters of recommendation. If, again, Southwestern does not have a particular requirement about academic versus professional, but we do have some expectations. So if you are within a year or two from any kind of academic program, it is our expectation that we will have an academic letter to read. Academic can be a teacher's assistant. It can be your academic advisor. It can be other people besides just the professors that you took their classes. You want to make sure, obviously, you're choosing somebody who really supports you. You don't want to rush them. You need to give them time. So, we're about 6 weeks, 7 weeks into the application cycle. We got a long way to go. But you want to give them, if you can, at least 4 to 6 weeks, especially as we're approaching the holiday season right now. And I think it was Carmen that said, maybe they're writing a lot of letters. If they're a very popular professor, for example, a lot of people are asking them. If they're a popular TA at the university, that a lot of people take their classes and these TAs support those professors, then a lot of people are asking those TAs. So you also can't be like, oh, today is Monday, I'm going to need a letter by Wednesday of this week. That's not how you want to handle this. So, whether or not it's 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 7 weeks, all of that, you can kind of play with your timing a little bit. But the point being is don't rush them. Ask them if they will be able to write for you a letter of recommendation. Will it be positive? And can they do it in a certain window of time? The window of time is the time period you're going to back up from the application deadlines when you hope to submit your applications or when you hope to have your applications to be complete. Okay, so again, keep track of these types of things on your spreadsheet. Ask them to help you accentuate your accomplishments. And again, this kind of goes back to a strategy part. And I mentioned earlier, if you only have one academic letter or one professional letter, but it's outstanding, and so long as you've met the requirements by that school, you don't need to add other letters. Now, you may want to, and if they're all of the same caliber, great. But at some point, it does kind of taper off and they kind of lose a little bit of the value added. Okay, so now we're going to pivot and talk about personal statements a little bit. So why do we ask you to write them, right? It's not just an exercise in torturing you or, making this process seem even more intimidating or daunting. It really is one of the few ways that we get to learn about who you are. It is, in essence, your interview. It just happens to be written down. So have that in your mind, right? What kinds of things you would want to cover if you were having an interview. Those topics translate very nicely to personal statements. It allows us to, if you choose to write about why our particular school or why law school or why a particular type of law or, something perhaps along the way that was your spark of why you wanted to go to law school, right? Those are all very appropriate topics. Those are all things that you might cover in an interview. You also cannot write about all of them in one personal statement. So you're going to have to be judicious and think about, what things. This is, again, that this tab on your spreadsheet that's about yourself. This is where you're going to have to think about, okay, what things are going to go here? Well, if I've already asked a recommender to talk about this one leadership experience that I have, I don't need to cover it again here because I've already covered it somewhere else. So this is how you're going to be as concise and strategic as possible. Okay, So I've got a couple excerpts for you. We've got an opening paragraph. I'm going to move on to the closing, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so let's start discussing. Give me some thoughts. And again, I know you were only getting the beginning and the end. But give me some of your impressions of the personal statement opening paragraph. Fatima, did you want to kick us off? Or was your hand up from before?
Sorry, I was having a hard time with my
No problem.
equipment. Yes, absolutely. One of the things that stands out to me is the background knowledge about this person is not in the forefront. It's more to the forefront about the parents' experience more than the candidate themselves. So you don't get a strong sense of who this person is so much as you do their background, their ethnic and cultural religious background, more so than anything. And then also, I don't know if it's something we're discussing here about being a splitter, having a lower GPA versus higher LSAT score. I don't know if that's something we're discussing, but
We're not
that's
talking about splitters here, and I'll tell you why. Because, again, as I said, if the personal statement is, akin to what an interview would be like, you wouldn't most likely talk about potential red flags or potential negatives or potential concerns, like you wouldn't offer that up in an interview. You wouldn't like go into an interview and say, "Hi, Dean Gear, my name is Fatima, and I would like to tell you why I have really low grades, but I do have a good LSAT score." Like, you probably wouldn't do that, right? You'd come in and you'd be like, "Hi, Dean Gear, I would love to really tell you about why I think Southwestern is such a great fit for me. And it's because I really want to pursue public interest law. And I saw that you had a, clinic that does children's rights advocacy," right? Like, it just wouldn't really fit. Now, that is not to say that it doesn't maybe warrant some attention somewhere in the application,
right.
but not in the personal statement. That is really like addendum territory.
Right.
Okay, so that's the reason why we're not going to focus on that right now. But thank you for your comment. Okay, let's go to Callie.
Yeah, when I first read the first part, I was like, if she ties this into some sort of social justice path, that would make so much sense. And it's like, it's if I were to read this, it would seem like such a like noble cause. And she has a very unique experience of why it led her there. Because I feel like, I mean, not a lot of people who pursue law school have come from difficulties like that, So,
So you read the first and you were like, I hope this is where it goes, right?
yeah, I was like, it would make a lot of sense if it went there and then she did go there
And then
it
she goes there. Okay.
it felt like a very, yeah, noble and heartfelt path for her. You know what I mean?
Okay. Great. Thank you. Carmen?
Callie stole the words right out of my mouth. Well, yes, like I understand that no one wants to trauma dump on their personal statement, but I think she did a really good job of tying that as like all in as to her why. So it wasn't like, here's how I am, but then I want to do sports law. Like she was very like concentrative on exactly who she was, why she was here, and what she wants from that school. And I think it completely tied it in perfectly.
Okay. Let me pick that apart a little bit. Don't you think, though, if she's talking about, her parents having to flee and the sacrifices that they made and the persecution that they faced, don't you think she could have also had a story where she said, and, because I have these opportunities that I do, like, I can pursue entertainment law, right? Like, I don't think it means that just because you come from a certain path that you're now limited, right? That you have to have blinders on, right? I mean, do you agree?
I completely agree. Yes, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
And I also
Right.
think
There's just kind of a way of like taking the reader along with you.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think that's what you were really trying to get at, right? that you would hope that, okay, if she's setting this stage, that, you know, I don't necessarily mean that it's going to be predictable, but you hope it's going to flow. And as you continue to read, you're going to learn more. It's going to continue to click, right? That's kind of the hope. And that by the time it wraps up, you're like, oh, even though I only, you know, read 2 pages about this person, I have a little bit of insight now as to how we got here and what they want to do and, you know, the reasons that this might be important to them.
So would you say that's her journey, like that it all has to kind of tie in, like of her sacrifice, like as well, because she's the first one in her family to go to college, and so she had to navigate that as well, and then that may silently explain her 2.5.
Maybe. You know, there's a lot of similarities between personal statements. There's also a lot of differences. And somebody else could have lived this exact same life as she did and written a totally different personal statement, like come at it from a totally different angle. And it could still be fluid and informative and engaging, right? So my point being, I don't think it's just like one size fits all. And I don't think it means if you have a certain background, whatever that means, that you can only convey certain things about yourself. Now, to Fatima's point, she does talk about her parents, right? They are kind of their bookend kind of focal points. And that's a tricky thing to do. I mean, I can tell you that the middle, she doesn't really, so it's nothing I would, you know, really worry about. But there are some candidates that spend several paragraphs talking about another person, and it is wasted real estate. That's a definite no. But sometimes a little bit can be powerful because it can kind of set the stage. Lauren, what did you want to add?
Excuse me, I'm a little congested. But there were 3 things that stood out to me. First, I thought that there was a really good hook. I just have never met a person personally, that has conflicting identities, especially these two. So, it kind of got me hooked and I wanted to read some more. Second, I thought that I got some like intellectual prowess from it a bit. I personally do not have this experience, but I know of some people who have dealt with you know, like expatriation experiences and immigration experiences. And I think that this person has probably spent a lot of time thinking about, you know, things like institutions and borders and nationality. And so I think that that could lend really well to someone who, like, you could have a great conversation within a class, and who would understand institutions and laws and things like that. They maybe extrapolation, but may have read some documents like that with their parents. And then also, I think that I got a little bit of a sense of like empathy or personal maturity. I'm not sure what the exact word would be, but just having an experience like this that you know, could I don't want to use the word traumatic, but could be kind of difficult to navigate, or navigating an obstacle like that, I think speaks to their ability to you know, you know, law school is a difficult experience. So I think that it speaks to their ability to navigate difficult situations.
Thank you. Very insightful. Vanessa?
Good evening. Somewhat similar. I loved what Lauren had said. I appreciate the person's conviction and deep roots. You could tell they're very introspective, and especially how they I guess, wrestle with the duality of their identities. And so, to Lauren's point, I think that would be really fascinating to sit among with them in class, or just even converse about various topics. But I mean, I do appreciate that they listed social justice. However, I was so intrigued. I wanted them to specify, okay, what type of law is that? I don't know, something about poverty? Is it something about religion, human rights? Is it foreign policy? I don't know. International law, I guess, in
Do you
this
feel it's
case.
important that the applicant know that kind of detail about what they might want to do?
No, well, I'm older, so I know what I want. They're 22. I was going to say that, but since they're young, I mean, I suppose that's fine. But I was just very curious, so That was just my own thing. But at 22, I don't know if I would have that precise of a direction in life.
Well, I don't know how old you are, Vanessa, and you don't have to tell me, but I would encourage you to still keep your options open. I think there's a lot of people that come to law school, or the application process at least, having an idea maybe about what they want. And then there's, more serious degrees of that. Some people come and they're like, oh, I'm a paralegal and I work in an office that does X type of law, and this is what I want to do. And you might actually do that. But you've heard the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And so, there's a lot of opportunities in law school to learn about some other areas of law that you might not have any idea even exist, or really any insight as to what those careers look like. So it's just a little gentle plug to also still keep your options open, even if you feel pretty settled.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. Okay. So some tips. Now, there are a lot of do's and don'ts, honestly. But we're going to focus on some of the do's, right? Be accurate, be personal, be confident. This is like your rock star moment. This is like remember again, in an interview kind of mentality, what are the things that you're so proud of, or you think are so important that the reader of your file know? These are the kinds of things that go in the personal statement. Be impactful. I said, somebody else could have walked the same person's journey and still written a different personal statement about it. But, not everybody's story is going to look the same, and it shouldn't, because you're all individuals. Don't worry about assuming that you know what we want to read, because you don't know. Also, don't get so caught up in like trying to stand out that you only stand out in negative ways. So that means things like, don't write a legal brief, don't write a poem, don't write just a creative writing like short story, don't write in the third person. Like, just approach this with seriousness and professionalism. But standing out in the law school application process in a good way really just kind of means putting together a solid application, not trying to do like gimmicky things. Okay. Now, I'm sorry, this is a little harder to see on this color background, but at Southwestern, we do have a couple of optional statements. The first being kind of like, why Southwestern? The second one is, why you? Again, these are optional. You do not need to include either one of these. I will say though, for any of you who are thinking about applying for our online program, if you haven't already talked about the online program in your personal statement, then going with optional statement number 1 and kind of circling back on maybe why you feel like the online program could be a good fit for you, that could be helpful in the application review process. So just again, remember, these are optional. These give you the opportunity to take all of those potential topics from your personal statement and break them up into other places in the application so that you can have it be a very palatable read, right? You don't want to be jumping from all sorts of different topics in your personal statement. So allow that to be a document that can stand on its own, and then you can have optional statements if you want them to add some additional context. Okay, so again, here's my list of don'ts. Don't offend the reader. Don't be crass. I'm not a fan of quotes. Most people that use them don't really understand them. Don't talk too much about someone else. So shout out to Fatima for bringing that up. Do not use the wrong school's name. Now, this happens more often than you may realize. And I think in a lot of cases, it's carelessness. And you just have written basically a template of a personal statement, and you just want to swap out one school's name for the next. And obviously you didn't do such a great job of it if I'm reading a statement with another school's name. I will tell you, this is a pretty serious offense, and myself and other committee members will likely deny your application if you do this, right? So even though it may just seem careless and an oversight, and you think like, gosh, man, like that was such a small little mistake, does it have to have this kind of negative consequence? And the answer is yes. This is a professional school that you're applying for to have a professional license to represent clients in the future in ways that protect their their bodies, their homes, their children, their estates, their jobs, their property, right? All sorts of things. Like, and you would never imagine that you would go to court and, have documents that are given to the judge that have the wrong client's name on them, right? Like, you would be ashamed to ever show your face in that court again. Kind of got the same thing, right? So this is the first step in pursuing this kind of professional life. Don't regurgitate your resume. There is already a resume, so you don't need to use the personal statement to just kind of give us a narrative of that. And number 10, don't assume you'll get another chance to make a first impression. For most schools, in fact, you will not have an opportunity to interview. We interview a very small number of candidates, and they are at our request. So this application, this personal statement, is really your interview, as I've said a few times. So really take the care that it needs to put together something that you're really proud of. Okay, so you've got a few other things. We already talked about how addenda can be optional, but they can be helpful. So here's a couple of examples. Talk a little bit about the resume. So we do require the resume. Not every school does. It should start at college. It can start a little later than college too, but it can start, nothing in high school should be on there. For most of you, we will not have very extensive professional careers, so I wouldn't expect it to be more than 1 page. If you do have a really, extensive work history, perhaps 2 pages, but not a CV. That's a little bit overkill. And you do want to include on there all the different things that you did, perhaps while you were in school, all the different ways that you spent your time, put the hours that you worked in these various capacities. And that can also help us kind of connect the dots, right? So in the example of the person that has the high LSAT, lower GPA, we already know that she was going to school, she was working at a restaurant, she was interning at a firm, but having some of that also broken down on the resume would be another way to just kind of connect those dots and help us kind of flesh out our impressions. Okay, and then lastly, go to our website, go to all the law schools' websites that you're considering. There's a lot of information that we all put out there. If you want to schedule a private visit, you're certainly welcome to. And then, as mentioned, we will have Southwestern Law Day on November 1st. So we hope you can join us for that. We'll have some other events as well, of course, both in Zoom and on campus. And so that concludes the formal slides. We've got about 20 minutes left.